Okay, so I now have two bricks which are uh, pretty accurately modeled to what they look like, at least from the top. I've got my little square brick, and then I've got my brick with the curve on it, and that is looking pretty close to what we have here, right? But that's only from the top view. What about from the bottom, right? Our bricks are not solid objects. They are hollowed out. Um, and that's how they snap together. So we are going to want to hollow out our bricks as well. They are not built the same. There are certain elements that are the same, um, but they do have some key differences. So let's talk about those similarities and differences. They each have 1/16 of an inch walls around the entire perimeter, and they each also have a circle, like a little circular peg, on the inside that is about a half of an inch in diameter from outer edge to outer edge, right? So the inner edge is offset again by about 1/16 of an inch. I'll go ahead and write that in here so that we can see it. Okay. 1/16. Okay. So that's the distance of, or I'm sorry, the thickness of this wall right in here. Um, and both of these bricks have that, right? And they also both have these little pegs around the outer perimeter. These pegs are offset from the interior wall. I'll zoom in on this a little bit. They're offset from the interior wall to the center of the peg about 1/4 of an inch. And they're squared, so it's the same on either side. And then if we zoom in even closer, we take a look at them, they're about 1/16 of an inch tall and about 1/32 of an inch wide. And now the pegs come all the way down to the bottom surface of our bricks, but our cylinders, and this is kind of important, our little cylinders in here, um, they are uh, they only come down to about here in the bricks, right? So it's hard to tell just using our rulers because that's what we're using for this, but I think it's offset. They kind of fit snugly with the pegs. It looks like it's offset about um, 1/16 of an inch. So I'll add in that measurement as well, actually. So the pegs are offset um, from here to here. That's about 1/16 as well. Great. Um, but these little interior pegs, they are flush. So I want to hollow out my bricks, and I'm going to do them one at a time because they are different from one another. They're built a little bit differently. So I'm going to select my curved brick. I'm going to use my my scroll wheel and just go ahead and hide the object. And I can go ahead and delete this curve as well. I don't really need it anymore. And what I'm left with is my brick. I'll notice it's now not snapped to my origin, which is right here where this green and red line meet. But it is in its correct place relative to where that curved brick is. So we're just going to leave it and model from here, and we should be fine. We shouldn't need to snap it to the origin at any point. Okay, let's hollow this guy out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in my shell command. Whoops. I'll type in my shell command, and I'll pick the faces that I want to remove. In this case, this face, this bottom face, because it's hollowed out from that direction. I want to make sure that my thickness is set to 1/16 of an inch. I'll hit enter. And then once I confirm that, enter again. And it's looking pretty good. But I do have these 4 little divots in the roof, the interior roof of my brick. So let's see what's going on here. And when you're trying to analyze your drawings, I find that using your front, like your orthographic views, is really helpful. So let's see. From our front view, I can see that, okay, so what happened was, you remember when we built these cylinders on top and they were built as separate objects and then we combined them with our total brick? So we built them, and we can see this from the front view. we used a shell command to make these each 1/32 of an inch thick, like the walls of it. And the bottom of the cylinder came down to the bottom of, I'm sorry, to the top of our brick. And so when we told it we wanted 1/32 of an inch border around the whole thing, that included the bottom. So this distance right here is 1/32 of an inch from this line to this line. And then when I hollowed it out, when I hollowed out the total brick, it said, okay, you wanted this to be 1/16 of an inch. We'll keep that border the same width. So that's what's happening here. It kind of juts up into the ceiling there. So it did exactly what I told it to do, but I made a mistake earlier. And that's why it doesn't look the way I want it to. So here's what we can do to fix it. I'll hit Control Z to undo that shell operation. So this is back to being a solid object. And then I'm going to grab, I'll hit my Control Shift, and then I'll click. I'm going to click on each of these surfaces, these little interior cylindrical surfaces. And then and I can do this in my front view if that feels easier. I'm just going to click on my blue arrow, the one that is aligned with my Z axis. I'll click on it. I'm not going to click and drag, just click. I'll type in that -1/32 of an inch. So that means I want it to go downward, negative, and I want it to only move down 1/32 of an inch because I'm getting rid of that additional border that I made. I'll hit enter, and now I should have, like this, these surfaces should be flush with these surfaces, and they're only separated by this boundary, these little borders. Great. Okay, so let's see what happens if we shell again. Okay, so shell result is not solid. So this is basically going to be a way to, this is going to be a great way for us to demonstrate, like, how do you kind of build around an issue that arises in Rhino. Rhino is, sometimes it's frustrating. It'll like break for no reason, or you'll get a result like that, and you're not really sure what's going on. It looks like these pegs on these two corners are slightly different than these two, and I'm not certain why. Let's see what happens if I just delete those two surfaces. Okay. So it says, when I click on my object, you'll see it says one open poly surface added to selection. That means that it's not a closed shape. It needs to basically be like watertight. And it looks like I am missing an interior. See, when I'm rotating it around, rotating my camera, I can kind of see that I'm missing this interior surface right here. The one that would be like the interior roof of my object. There's a little gap in there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a surface. Not a solid, but just a surface. Come over here, my surface tools. And I'm just going to hit rectangular plane. I can also type that in, of course. And because my snaps are on, I can make sure that I'm going to snap to the end of this interior box. And then I'm going to adjust my camera so I can see the opposite corner. And I'll snap it to that end of the interior box. So this should be pretty squared. And now I've got this plane. It's still an open surface because it's not connected to this open surface. So if I grab both and I hit join, and then I click on the object again, great. Now it says it's closed. So that means that I did it correctly. I fixed it all up. And now if I go to, for example, my front view and I see that wireframe, the pegs are flush to the bottom. I have this little interior roof in here. Great. So I have now shelled out my object. And by the way, like I said, things break in Rhino all the time. Not a big deal. Sometimes it's very frustrating, but usually the fixes are pretty easy, or at least like you can go backwards and kind of figure out where you went wrong and still achieve the result that you're going for. Okay, so I think that next what we should do, let's take a look at this. Let's next drop in our circle, our interior circle. It'll be the same as these green ones, so it'll be 1/2 inch in diameter from the outer edge, and then it will be 1/16 of an inch thickness, and there'll be 1/16 of an inch between the bottom of the cylinder and the bottom of the brick, right? it'll be like on the interior, it'll be raised ever so slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this cylinder first. I'm going to have it stretch all the way down to the bottom here of my brick, of my red brick, and then I will just move it up 1/16, move that bottom surface up 1/16 of an inch, and then I can hollow it out. All right, so I'm going to type in, let's see, I'm going to type in cylinder. I want to build another cylinder. I want the base of my cylinder to be in the center of my big brick, right? So you'll notice that if you're trying to get something to the center, if you try and hover your cursor over it, it won't really to the center of an object. You hover your cursor over it, it won't snap to it automatically. What you have to do is you basically hover your cursor over the perimeter of the object that you want it to be snapped to the center of, and this little white line will show up, and it'll say, oh, you want to be in the center of this object that you're hovering over. So once I get that, I can click, and it'll default my circle to the center here. And I'll make sure that I'm looking at diameter, not radius, and I'll make my diameter what is it, 1/2 of an inch, right? Let me double check that. Yeah, it's 1/2 of an inch, so that's 1/2 an inch. I'll click, and then it says, all right, where do you want the end of your cylinder to be? I'm going to switch to my front view, and I'm just going to snap it down to the bottom here. And now, if I look at it in perspective, I've got that cylinder in there. It looks pretty good. It's a separate object than my brick. I haven't combined them yet. And I am going to, first I'm going to raise this bottom up 1/16 of an inch, and then I will shell it out. So I'll hit that Control Z again. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. I'm sorry, not Control Z, I'm sorry. Control Shift. And I'll just click on this bottom surface here, because I'm going to just be adjusting just that bottom surface, right? And then I'll click my up arrow, and I'll move that up positive, right? Because I'm moving upwards, 1/16. Enter, it moves up. And now, if I look at this from one of my orthographic views, that interior peg, it's moved up just a little bit. Great. All right, now I want to hollow out this cylinder, and I don't want to make the same mistake. I'm going to come back over to my solid tools here. I don't want to make the same mistake that I did with these pegs on the top, right? I want to make sure that it's hollow from both ends. So how am I going to make sure that I can see that interior surface, right? If I go to my wireframe view, it gets really confusing, and I can't actually click on this interior surface, right? I can click on like the edges or like the cylinder itself, but I am not clicking on surfaces because my wireframes don't care about that. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this top brick so that I'm just looking at the cylinder, and now I'm going to shell it out. I'll shell this out from the top and from the bottom. I hit both sides because I want it to be hollow, right? My thickness should still be 1/16 of an inch. I'll still want to delete that input. And when I'm good to go, I hit enter. And it's shelled out. And now if I show the brick, and it'll make this reappear too. That's fine. We can go ahead and rehide it. But if I look at this from the bottom, right, it already looks way more like how my Duplo blocks look when I hold them from the bottom, right? I can see that like half circle happening in there. Amazing. I'll hide this block with the curve. Okay. So I'm almost done with this red brick, actually. All I really need to do now is add those additional little pegs, these little squares in here. And that should be pretty easy to do. Let's look at our object from our top view so that we can kind of see everything in accurate to like what it looks like from my sketch here. I have my 1/16 of an inch walls. I have my interior peg. Okay, so I'm basically going to add, actually first let me just combine these two objects. So I'll go back into my perspective view. I'm going to combine my cylinder, hold down shift. I'll click on my cylinder, hold down shift, click on my box, and I'm just going to Boolean union. Excuse me, I'm going to Boolean union these two. Click Boolean union, and I click on it. It's all one object. Great, they're combined. Okay, now I'm going to build out my little peg guys. So let's draw a guiding box from the interior corner of my brick, 1/4 of an inch inward. Okay? So that will mark like the center points for each of these little rectangles. All right, so I'm going to draw a rectangle. It'll ask me for the first corner of my rectangle. I'll snap it to here. And now it's going to ask me for the length. And we're going to go for 0.25, enter. And then it'll ask me for for the width, also 0.25, enter. Great. So now I have this curve right here. And I want the center of my little brick guys to be right along this axis. And actually, it conveniently lines up with the axes of these little pegs. Because basically what's happening in here, right, is that when you snap one brick into another, right, this interior circle, I'll use a different color, this interior circle of the peg, it is kind of fitting very tidily into like kind of being held in between these notches and in between the center peg. So that's why everything should line up really tidily. But it's nice to measure it out and just make sure, like I said, like this is a 1/4 inch. So I can see that. Great. I'm going to go into my perspective view just to see where it's coming from. Okay. So I have drawn this rectangle on the ceiling, the interior ceiling of my brick. And that's fine. And now what we can do is we can use it as a guiding point to place our little rectangular pegs. So I'm going to come over to my box again. And I want to, I'm drawing my box from the center of this line, right? So where before we drew boxes, we would start with one corner and end with another, right? I hit escape right there to get out of my command. Instead, what I want to do is I want to draw the center of the box and then kind of extrude it out from there. So what am I going to do? I'll hit box, or I'll type in box, and then I'm going to hit center. It wants to know the center of the base. I'm going to hover my cursor over here. It should snap to my to either the center or the endpoint. They should be the same. Click. And now it's going to ask me for for my dimensions. So I want to make my total width 1/32 of an inch, right? And my total height 1/16 of an inch. So 1/32, or I'm sorry, other way around. 1/16, right? No, width 1/32. Okay. So you want to go with 1/32 for that first measurement. Enter, and then 1/16. And actually, because we're drawing from the middle here, and we actually want the center point to be, I'm sorry, like the length to be twice this, so we're actually going to make our width, instead of 1/16, we'll make it 1/8, because you can see that half of our little rectangle here gets dropped into the border, so it'll disappear. All right, now it wants to know how tall I want this thing. So I'm going to switch my views to my right view, and I'm just going to snap it downward to the apparent intersection. And now if I look at this in perspective, so you can see how the shapes overlap with each other, right? They look flush, but you can still see the outline. So just to reiterate, because I was drawing from the center and it wanted to know how tall to make this rectangle, I did twice what this height was. So instead of 1/16, I did 1/8, so that it would go 1/16 in one direction and then 1/16 in the other. And now let's say that I want to trim off this excess here. Maybe I'm like, hey, like I don't want this intersecting. Um, or I want this peg to end right there. I don't want those extra lines. It'll be okay if you don't do that. You can Boolean union them, and because they're flush, they'll intersect and they'll look nice. But just to demonstrate how that would work, you can use a command called trim, T-R-I-M. It'll say select your cutting objects. So I'm going to select this brick because I'm keeping the whole brick, right? And that's going to cut, it's going to intersect with my other object. And then I'll say, enter. And then it says select object to trim. So I'm going to select this guy in here. You might need to make a couple of selections, but you want to cut it, or you want to like click the object. I'm going to Control Z this a couple times. You want to click on the object on the side that you want to trim it. So if I wanted to trim off this part of the object and leave this rectangle, and I clicked here, that part would disappear, and I don't want that. So I need to make sure that I'm clicking on the side that I want to trim. Okay, it looks all right. I'll hit enter. But yeah, you'll notice that it opens up my poly surface here. Like now it's just basically fully cut off that edge. So I'm just going to go ahead and cap that really quickly. And now it is closed. Great. Okay. So if I look at this from the top view, I've got one peg, and I want to make a bunch of them, right? I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with my pegs on the top, and I'm just going to mirror it, basically. So I'll select it. I'll type mirror. Start of my mirror plane is the middle here. I hold down Shift to lock it to my axis. Click. All right, that's done. And enter to do it again. Or I'll select them both actually. So I grab both objects, and now I'll mirror. I'm going to mirror them this way this time. Cool. Okay, so now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these pegs, right? And they look all right. I want to put them, instead of mirroring them, right, I want to copy them and rotate so that they fit in with this other side, right? So that they go this way. So they go horizontally instead of vertically. So how do I do that? I'm going to, do you remember how we copied our brick from our original square brick so that we could edit it and make our rounded one? I'm going to select each of these little pegs. So I held down Shift, I clicked on each of them. I'm going to copy, I'll paste. If you just copy and paste, you don't type those commands in, then it'll just paste it directly into the same place that you copied it from. And then staying in my top-down view, you'll notice that your gumball sometimes has these little curves along it. If I go into my perspective view, I can see more of them. That's my rotation option. So it'll rotate it purely along that axis. So if I go to my top view and I click and drag, it shows me by how much I've rotated it. I can spin, spin, spin. If I hold down Shift, it'll once again lock me to those dimensions, so I can rotate it 90 degrees, like that. And then just for demonstration's sake, let's say that I wanted to rotate these a very specific amount. Same thing as when you click on the arrows. If you click on the rotation, you can type in a specific number, like, I don't know, let's say I want to rotate it 28.3 degrees for some reason. I can rotate it exactly that amount. Okay, let's go back to our perspective view. This is looking great. This is just about done. Yeah, I'll delete this curve, this little box that I drew to guide my pegs in. And now I'm just going to select everything. So I'll do that backwards selection style. I've got everything, and I'll Boolean union it. And now I can check to see if I did it correctly. I'll rotate the brick, take a gander at it, and I'll click on it. And it says that it is a closed poly surface, which means that I did that right. Fantastic. So this brick is done. Amazing. Um,